Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters. I'm Jamil Zanishev.
I'm Travis Campbell.
And I'm Mike Persine, and you're listening to Brew Strong.
Wow,
Got him.
so professional.
Very well done.
We finally figured it after 15, 16 years.
Here you go.
Piece of cake. Piece of cake. Yes. How have you guys been doing? Seems like it's been a while since we all chatted.
I've been fine over here. It's actually starting to cool off the slightest amount, so it's still about 20 degrees hotter than wherever you guys are at.
Yeah, I've been brewing up a storm. I've got doing batches almost every weekend, getting ready for a couple of competitions coming up, and Oktoberfest is kind of my thing. I always like to make a beer for that. And
Nice. Do you have an Oktoberfest you guys do up in the Reno area?
not like a large citywide thing, but I was gonna go check this one out at a brewery on September 30th. That's the Saturday. Yeah, and check that out. But I always do my Meritzen. She turned out really nice this year, so
Nice.
see if she can win a couple medals too.
I love a good Oktoberfest. It's one of my favorite things. And once I was no longer with the brewery, we used to do a thing at the brewery where I'd bring in like 20 different, German beers that really hard to get into the brewery and have just a rockin' Oktoberfest. And since I'm not there anymore, they're not doing it anymore. I was thinking, well, maybe one of the local cities will have me, do an Oktoberfest for them. But maybe Reno. That would be a big one.
I mean, they're always looking for an excuse to throw a party up here.
Oh yeah,
all the casinos.
I love it up in Reno. It's a wonderful town.
Yeah, we got good weather. We're in the mid 80s, dry,
Nice.
sunny.
And then in Houston, Travis, Oktoberfest.
Well, yeah. So the bars here and there will do this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
Our downtown Flying Saucer's having one. They'll bring in.
Is there like a big like city organized one, where there's, hay bales and
No.
people? No.
There's other things that aren't Oktoberfest that are, but mainly it's outside of what you call the city. As you get into the middle of nowhere, people do various things as fall approaches, hay rides, things like that.
Mhm.
But now it'd be lovely if like NRG Stadium would host an Oktoberfest.
Yes, there you go. Now you're talking. See, that's some thinking there.
That's the scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think every city needs an Oktoberfest, or at least every small region needs an Oktoberfest of its own.
I agree.
Bill in the chat wants to know: can we rename Oktoberfest to Hoptoberfest and do a special full month of IPAs? Actually, that's not a bad idea. I think
Just not in September, right?
That's kind of always my dilemma. Is it's the hop harvest time of year, so you got all that going on, and then you got Oktoberfest going on.
Oktoberfest truly should be in September, and then we could do Hoptoberfest in October.
Yeah,
or we could do Hoptember and Oktoberfest.
Nice.
Hoptember, early September, or April. Hey, boom. January, hop. No,
just hops all year round. We'll figure out a way to slam hop into every.
Bill, you keep working on that. Figure out what month that should be. I bet it loves a great Oktoberfest. It's my dear friend John Blickman, and I was thinking about it today. I really love how a lot of times he'll call me pal. In an email, he'll say, "Hey pal," I like that.
Gotta be a Midwest
because
thing,
you
right?
get your name right.
It's a little bit of a Midwest thing. Yeah. No, he knows. We've had way too many drunken evening together for him not to know my name. It's usually cursing and shaking his fist when he says my name. But what are you gonna do? But that guy's a genius, and he's constantly making cool new things. One of the latest new things is their Boilermaker kettles. It's probably the best boiling kettle on the market. It's really a lot of technology has gone into this thing. And they used to have, the Hellfire burner and then the immersion heater. And then they made a thing called the Boilermaker Surface, which is there's nothing inside the kettle. It is just a smooth surface. So you don't have like electric elements to run into. You don't get that uneven scorching. Makes it super easy to clean. Fantastic thing. They're even doing this for pro size equipment. So you can get it on the from any size you're doing, from the home brewer up to the pro brewer. You can get these bonded elements. I think it's like three like pie shaped elements that are bonded to the bottom of the kettle. So it makes it easier to clean. The minute you get a drop of liquid in there, you can start your boil. You can step mash in this thing, all that really cool. And this is from the mine that brought you the auto sparge, the beer gun, the brew commander, the brewmometer. They've got whirlpool kits, hop rocket, hop blocker. They whatever it is, they've got it. And just a brilliant company led by a brilliant dude. And he's been paying for the show for 15, 16 years. So you don't have to. So the least you can do is send him a nice email at feedback@blickmanengineering.com. Tell him how much you appreciate that he pays for the show. And, he doesn't ask me to say that. I just feel that it's important. It's so important to me that I had the wrong email address. He goes, there is no feedback at Blickman Engineering. This is maybe like 5-10 years ago. He goes, but, so we added it. He's like, yeah, emails coming. He enjoys
I remember
it.
that.
He checks them himself. So it's nice. I appreciate that you guys send those out.
How long was he thinking you had zero reach because he's not getting these emails?
It had to be like 10 years. I think it was like halfway through the show series we've got so far. Is like, oh, you mean
John's on the show and he's like, what the hell's that address, Jamil? Ah, shit. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, it is the joy of working for the Brewing Network. Everything is 100%. We've never made a mistake in our lives here at the Brewing Network.
You've made the best catchphrase. Who was it? Did Palmer create it? Innovating your brew day?
No, it was Jason Petros. JP.
Okay, yeah.
There's like John Palmer, John Plisse, and Jason Petros. Every time I say JP, people think I'm talking about somebody other than Jason Petros. But Jason Petros actually quite a clever marketing mind on that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the one who said innovating your brew day, which I think is just a genius slogan. And I think Blickman Engineering is innovating your brew day right there.
Definitely.
All right, let's see here. Today we wanted to talk about fermentation tips and tricks. There's a lot to fermentation. It's very simple on the surface. You put some yeast in your wort and it becomes beer. No big deal, right? It pretty much always works unless you have dead yeast to start with, or you put it in liquid that's way too hot or doesn't have any sugar in it. Other than that, it'll make beer. So very simple. But how do you make great beer? What are some of the, like anything, you can drive, you can mash your foot on the gas pedal, you can kind of mess around with the steering wheel. Are you going to drive successfully? Are you going to plow into a wall? What's going to happen? So there's a few things you should know about driving, and there's a few things you should know about fermentation as well. Let's see. Who wants to go first? I will. I love this topic. I've said this one before. If you can't measure dissolved oxygen, if you don't have a meter, although the price of parts per million meters from like Milwaukee have come down, they're like 100 and something bucks now, which isn't cheap by homebrew standard. But for a commercial brewery, that's dirt cheap. You should be measuring your oxygen. And even for some home brewers, I've seen them spend a lot more money on far less than being able to tell how much dissolved oxygen is there. But as a home brewer myself, back in my day, it was like $1,000, $2,000 to measure dissolved oxygen. So I couldn't afford it. And what I did was measure the things I could. I could measure time easily, right? And I could measure flow. I used a medical regulator that somebody gave me, and was able to measure, how many liters a minute of oxygen. If you don't have one of those, and let's say you've already got your setup and it doesn't measure, you can go on eBay, and for probably less than $10, definitely less than $20, you can get yourself a flow meter. It's a little ball trapped in a cylinder there, and
The rotometer.
There you go. The engineer speaks up. And you just want to make sure you get one in the range that you want. And so for homebrew, you're generally talking around a half a liter, maybe 1 liter a minute is what kind of flows you want. So get something from quarter 0 to 5 liters a minute, 3 liters a minute, something like that. Again, fairly cheap. You just need to make sure that when you set them up generally up and down, and you can do it with that, and do time and your liters per minute, and just measure that. And if the resulting beer turns out without a great result, and you think you need more oxygen, well, then you have at least a way to measure how much oxygen you're putting in there, or less oxygen, whatever it turns out to be.
So
yeah, I think it's a prime tip right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, what do you use for measuring your O2? 'Cause, I mean, you do a lot of NEPAs, and I know you OT the heck out of your beer for those.
Yeah, so I've actually built it's a welding oxygen tank that has one of those brewing regulators on there. It's actually down over here.
So
but
those
I actually
look just like the medical ones. So I'm curious about the accuracy of that. So sorry, you were going.
Oh, but then I actually built where I'll inline oxygenate as I'm knocking out. So I try to flow a little bit less than what Jamil recommended, just because I'm flowing the entire knockout. So
Right.
I'm going 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then I'll actually push my knockout into the racking tube, because I actually want to keep that oxygen in solution. I don't want to splash it over the top. So actually I want to fill from the bottom, and then these bubbles are coming through. And I think it's worked really well for me. I've had good successes, but even with like juice, which is particular about its high oxygen aeration. So
yeah, it really does need a lot of oxygen.
Yeah. But I actually don't have a DO probe, and I was definitely thinking I should probably step up to really be able to control that. And Jamil makes good points, and I need to get off my butt.
Yeah. So my adjuster, my regulator probably looks just like yours, and it does look a lot like the medical tank ones, Jamil. The difference being is the one that they sell for us home brewers threads onto a welding type O2 tank versus the flip on for the medical type tanks. Yeah, it's exactly that. And on that left-hand side is a dial where you can dial in your liters per minute. Now, my big reason for not exactly trusting what that says is, if it's just like a pressure regulator, it depends on what the downstream back pressure is. And I have a 0.5 micron sintered stone They also sell 2-micron sintered stones, and I'll tell you,
Right.
you can see the flow difference through the two stones.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
so you go back to what you said, what
Mhm.
worked, what didn't work, try a little more, try a little less, brew again.
Well,
Yep.
the little ball in the thing,
That's unbeatable. That's going to be on it.
that's always going to be accurate,
Yeah.
even with back pressure.
Yes.
The problem with a lot of welding regulators is that they will bleed off in order to regulate pressure. And so you can't leave them hooked up all the time.
Right. Yeah. The ones for an oxygen acetylene type welding system, now that's not going to do it for you.
Yeah.
And that really is only going to regulate pressure. It's truly a pressure regulator, not a flow regulator, which is why I'm suspect on the one that Mike and I use. But I stick with what I do.
Right.
It makes good beer, and I do the same thing every time.
Well, and I'd also say one of the things about those sintered stones is I think the finer the sinter stone you can get, the better for getting oxygen into your wort. And the thing we would do at Heretic was put the sintered stones in an ultrasonic cleaner, and you'd be surprised at how much crud came out of those things. You think it's like a smooth surface, it's so smooth. As a home brewer, what I did was I would take my sintered stones and I would put them in little quarter jars, quarter mason jars, quarter pint, or whatever they were, quarter quart. And I would put a bit of water in there, and then I would run them through the pressure cooker. I would
nice.
sterilize them, and you'd see material come out of it, fluff out of it from that process too.
Yeah, you've inspired me. I'm going to burn mine.
And then I knew it was sterile too. So I had like 3, and then each, I would just go through them. I'd crack open a sterile one. Because a lot of material gets in there. All right.
I did inline for a little bit, and I didn't like what I saw because I didn't clean it well enough. So I stopped doing inline.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back to I have a wand type. But anyway, sorry.
Yep. All right. Who's got Mike? You had raised your hand earlier. Who's got the next?
Yeah. Well, I can give you tips from what I've actually found using a tilt hydrometer. Pretty interesting to find that I've been getting way better attenuation by starting the maturation rest more around 60% ADF if you're looking for 80, and that's almost 2/3 of the way there, not necessarily 2 to 5 points from final.
So you're saying raise the temperature about 60% through? Yeah.
So it's actually kind of, I remember a podcast way long ago, you guys talked about, as soon as you start to see that drop off in bubbles in your blow off, well, I can actually watch it in the tilt and see like, look, it's slowing down. I can use a little Excel stuff to figure out what the slope of the fermentation is looking like. And when it starts to slow and it slows to where I'm starting to get uncomfortable with it, I can actually push it with temperature. And I've been getting really good results. And it may not be that typical by the book 2 to 5 points from FG,
Yeah, I don't think 2 to 5 points is correct. I think that's something somebody said back in the day, and it kept getting repeated. And like you, what I found was when you see it start to slow, increase the temperature, or try and take that. And one of the things I did was when I saw any signs of slowing, when I anticipated slowing, then I would just, raise the restrictive temperature of my chilling, and it would, over the next day or so get up to that point, and I would just keep chasing it higher and higher. So I wasn't instantly heating it up, but, I would let the fermentation, draw the temperature up, and made a big difference in a situation like you're saying. Yeah, that's a good point.
I think it does a couple things. I think it's helping with attenuation. It's getting those mopping up operations going. It's really helping that fermentation take that next phase of kind of slowing down and going to bed kind of thing for the yeast. But I've seen steady increases in ADF, 5 to 10%. I mean, I had a couple beers finished at 85% attenuation, which I was really happy with, because I was going for a dry beer on those. So it was, to see that was awesome. And I kind of credit that to controlling that temperature a little differently than what I might have done if I'd only followed the common knowledge, I guess.
There you go.
But,
All right.
Mike,
I was gonna say,
I use
let's take a short break. And when we come back, we'll hear from TC about his tips and tricks right after.
Cliffhanger.
All right, we're back. We're talking fermentation tips and tricks, and TC, you're up.
Yeah, so I didn't have something new just yet. I was going to pile on to what Mike was saying. The tilt, its accuracy may be arguable, but its effect and what you can learn from your beer, I appreciate it. And one thing it shows me is that my little temperature probe that goes just into my fermenter isn't as accurate as what's happening when that yeast is really happy in my fermenter. So what I find is that my temperature is already higher than I thought it was, and maybe higher than I necessarily wanted it to be. So I need to start dialing it up a notch or two so I don't force that to crash as it starts to slow down. So I kind of use a tilt to kind of chase where the beer wants to go within reason.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm with you, Mike. I start ramping sooner rather than later, within reason.
Yeah,
well, it's an interesting point, because I've always advocated, and at Heretic, I insisted on measuring gravity every day and pH of a fermentation. And it's difficult as a home brewer to take the samples and get those measurements. So the tilt is handy in that respect. But, having information on your fermentation, what I can tell you from professionally brewing is that you could look at the specific gravity of a beer, and you could look at the pH of a beer, and it would track exactly the same every time you fermented that beer. And anytime you saw a deviation in that pattern, there was a problem. There was something wrong with your yeast. There was something different with the wort. There was something wrong with the equipment that was chilling, whatever it would be, something was different. And so it was really, it's interesting to hear you guys say, you're depending on this data quite a bit to, help you improve your fermentations.
Yeah. And I can, if you don't have kind of that resource of these data loggers, I would just take a gravity every day, take a pH every day. And I could see it, it was dropping. It dropped 10 degrees between yesterday and today, and the next day it only drops 5. So that's an obvious slowdown. We're slowing down in your blow off. If you use Star Sand like I do, you've got quite a lot of bubbling and foaming during high Kreuzen. And then when that falls, almost like it's the same as the Kreuzen falling in the fermenter, you can kind of make an assessment that you're probably ready to either do like a natural temperature raise, like Jamil was saying, where you just take off the cooling. Or actually what I do is I try to control the temperature raise using an Inkbird and a heater, because I've, got a cold garage sometimes and can't always let that go, and it will just crash on its face. So yeah, there's quite a few ways to do it, but the key is for me is controlling that point where I start the maturation rest.
So now we need the tilt pH.
I guess there's pro style ones that,
well,
I've heard
you could,
ads.
You could
do
put
pH,
a pH meter in. The
Yeah.
problem is that the electrode becomes, the glass and the electrode becomes too mucked up too quickly, and really sets things off. Continuous pH monitoring can be a problem with something as protein rich as beer. Here's a couple of quick ones. Don't use distilled or RO water with yeast. Yeah,
that's a osmotic pressure kind of thing, right?
Exactly. you want to use, your general tap water. And if there's not enough mineral salts in there, like Mike's saying, the osmotic pressure can be extreme on the yeast. You're essentially just cramming water into the yeast cells. They'll blow up or die. So you don't want to do that. Don't spin your stir plate too fast.
Yeah, we talked about this on the podcast with the guy from Lalamand, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. We had a
And it's
nice
to
one
try
with
try to prevent stress on the yeast right in the middle of their growth cycle. You don't want to be having crashing into each other and having all that shear, is what he says. And that's a pretty good fluid mechanics reference, is
right.
that shear force on these yeast membranes and yeast molecule or cells can, you got to think like sliding across, that's a shear. So
it's certainly more delicate on dried yeast being rehydrated, because their membranes are quite tender at that point and haven't really fully reconstituted. And so I was asking about stirring yeast when you're rehydrating. You're told not to stir the yeast. And what's the reason for that? It's like, well, the yeast cells are so delicate. If you stir, you smash a lot of them. Same thing goes for a stir plate. You go way too fast. They're not indestructible little balls. They're fairly tough, but you can screw them up with too fast a stir plate. Yeah. You can go back in the archives and you can listen to Avi from Lalamand. He was
Great show.
Fantastic guest. Yeah. Well, we'll have him on again. That guy's got a lot to share.
Especially because I think, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, especially because for many of us who are so used to starters and buying liquid yeast, dry yeast can seem like a black box. And that podcast was really cool for people who don't necessarily use dry yeast or per se trust it, because I know there's, a stigma. So, yeah.
So back to our stir plates. So we're saying don't create the tornadic vortex, right? No, we're trying to shake up the yeast just enough to flash out some CO2, pick up some oxygen.
Right, just a slight dimple in the surface.
Yeah, just a dimple. Okay.
That slight dimple means that liquid is traveling down, and that liquid's coming up the sides. You're exchanging the liquid at the surface area, which is what you want, and that's where you're picking up your oxygen. And you're also just ensuring that the yeast are evenly distributed throughout the liquid, so they can bump into the sugars that they want to consume. I gotta say, I'm having a couple of I'm gonna be just trashed before the end of tonight. I'm having some Moxa in flight.
I love Moxa.
7.3%.
Delightful.
Oh my God. It's just, this is it's like Citra, Simcoe, El Dorado, and Mosaic.
Oh, I'm surprised. Mosaic, huh?
Yeah, they're magicians over there with the hazies. Is that a hazy? I can't see.
No, it's a West Coast. It's brilliant.
Oh, there you go.
I'm actually a little pre-gaming. Fantastic. Great folks there. I think it's the main bartender's name, Thomas. He's fantastic. Just a great crew of people, and they make great beer. It's a great time. If you're on the Rockland area of California, it's in between Sacramento and Auburn, Sacramento and Tahoe.
You're on the 80 corridor, Interstate 80.
Just stop and enjoy some Moxa. They always have good food trucks and other things going on there, food wise.
They really specialize in the darker beers too, stouts, porters.
They have some amazing ones, man. And I don't want to get sidetracked here, but I had my first beer with candy cap mushrooms. And that's what everyone's like, what? And so they're not psychedelic mushrooms. They are they taste like and smell like maple syrup. That weird?
It's not like eating blowfish. It's not like you have to trim it right so you don't get poisoned.
No.
Yeah.
It just tastes in different ones taste more or less like maple syrup, but
Sorry, nice.
yeah.
Like fenugreek has that flavor, kind of, right?
Yes.
Okay,
You're the
there you go.
second person to tell me that.
Yeah.
So it's a compound. Somebody's isolated what compound it is that tastes like maple. So
I wish I had a friend out that way that would just send me some of those beers. It sounds fantastic.
yeah, sucks.
I still got to send you some of mine, Travis. I was going to can up this Meriton.
Yeah. Nice. I haven't. I've only done one beer for one competition, and I didn't send it out because only one. When I bottle for comp, I'm going to send you both some beer. Jamil will act like he drinks his, and you can give me the truth about what you think about yours.
Yeah. No, and I also have a pre-prohibition Pilsner. It's actually right out of Jamil's classic American lager recipe.
Very nice.
The only thing I changed was I used Mount Hood instead of Saaz.
I thought you were going to relate that to yeast. You use a specific yeast to get that profile.
I did also use the Lutra Kveik, the pseudo lager yeast.
Okay.
Because I didn't have enough cooling capacity in August to do another 52-degree fermentation. So I fermented it at like 72, but that Lutra stuff, man, she cleans up nice.
All right. Other fermentation tips and tricks. Either you got one? No?
Pitch more, not less.
I can do another one.
Go ahead.
I mean, well, I guess when it comes to tips and tricks for fermentation, I'd say there's been a lot of interesting things in the realm of dry hopping and when to dry hop, and like if you're trying to get haze or not. And there's interesting new things about yeast. Certain yeasts are haze positive or haze neutral. These new terms, and that one's really neat. That we can now design beers and their haze based on our yeast selection. And then when we dry hop, there's some interesting evidence that you can push more haze if you use a haze positive yeast like a Boddington's, which is London 3 or London Fog or Juice, and then you dry hop after fermentation, you can actually get a better haze. And there's some really interesting science going on around that. So dialing up haze in your fermentation, it's real. And actually they found that when you dry hop early, like if you're doing knockout dry hop additions or day 1, 2, 3, you can actually drop your haze out of your beer. Like there's a clarifying effect. So tips and tricks that you might want to look at if you're going for hazy and you want that real milky, turbid haze, you might want to look at cold dry hopping.
Well, here we go. Start working on the hazy tips and tricks show.
I got you.
I
thought that was a good fermentation one because it was yeast dependent. So I grabbed it.
But it's also it reminded we should do a hazy tips and tricks.
Definitely. I got a hazy double IPA going right now, and it's turning out nice. I did a wet Cascade mash hop.
Nice.
To push some more precursors.
There you go. I need to try the wet hops from Blue Lake. Blue Lake hops. I'm gonna see Adrian's gonna send me some. I just need to work that out with him. And then I need to brew. I'm gonna be on the road for the next month. I'm gonna be gone for like 32 days. I'm going to Dusseldorf to start with. Then I'll be in Amsterdam. I'm going to do the Schumacher Latzen beer release. Then I'm going to do Amsterdam to do a collab with Morschlutel. And then I'm gonna tour around with my good buddy Aaron. And then I'm going to Norwich to see Martin and Adnams. And I'm gonna meet up with my friend Paul. And then we're gonna head out to Birmingham, going to do the Black Country wandering around, meet up with some friends there, head out to out to Jeremy Clarkson's farm.
No, nice.
Have you watched Clarkson's farm?
I know it's still on the list.
Oh, I tell you, if
That
you
sounds
like
like a fantastic trip, but I'm not sure why you're putting Alabama in the middle of it.
if you like Top Gear, you love Clarkson's farm. It's fantastic. And then we're going to York. We're going to hit
Ooh.
Timothy Taylor's, Theakston's, Black Sheep, and then going to head down to London, do the keynote at the BrewCon, then heading off to Italy with Liz for 10 days to do Venice, Florence, and Rome. It's a little side trip to Pompeii, which I told her I couldn't go to Italy and not see Pompeii. Then back to Dusseldorf to catch the Sticka releases for.
Oh, nice.
So I'm going to catch all three of those and hopefully write an article and do all that good stuff.
Yeah, but that late in the trip, you won't remember shit.
Not like 30 plus days. Henry's going to meet up with me in Dusseldorf on the second leg. So that'll be fun. All right. Let's do another quick break. And then when we come back, Travis, surely you've thought of some fermentation tip or trick. And you'll have it right after this.
Sure.
All right, we're back. We're talking fermentation tips and tricks. And we've come up with some good ones already, but I'm sure there's tons more. Travis, you're a great brewer, and you've got a lot of fermentation knowledge. What's one of your favorite tips?
Well, I'll go through an observation.
Mm-hmm.
I rely on a very specific calculator to get me in the right direction, but I also alter it as I need around my brew day, around my word, et cetera, my experience. And I use containers that aren't exactly perfect scientific containers graduated the whole way up. And so I was using the Mr. Multi-calculator for quite a while when I realized I was off on my calculation on my volume in my Nalgene type bottles. And so when I corrected it, I started pitching less yeast, and immediately everything was taking longer to finish out, and my barley wine didn't finish out, and that's just not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to fix my situation, again, learning from the situation, I just said, okay, I'm going to add 20% to whatever Mr. Multi tells me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really 20%. It's my approximation and my little vessels I use to store yeast. And very recently, for some reason, I looked at it really closely and I said, well, the bottom's just plastic, so let me just add another 1/4 inch of yeast.
Mm-hmm.
And the boost in my fermentation was just ridiculous. Now, 1/4 inch doesn't tell anybody anything, but you've often said it: easy to underpitch, not easy to overpitch. And I think I'm seeing it, and I think I'm learning it. And sometimes it scares me how fast even 001 finishes out. It's like as fast as I've done certain fikes at 95 degrees in my garage at. It's just, it's not finished, but fermentation's hitting an end, it's time for cleanup. And it's amazing what a little adjustment in your healthy yeast pitch will do to your beer. No off flavors, absolutely not off flavors. The latest IPAs I've made are some of the best I've made. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the tweaks I've made. So again, it's an observation more than a tip or trick. I guess the tip would be, when in doubt, pitch more, not less.
Yes, absolutely. People that are trying to, say, well, here's the amount that, you need to ferment, this beer or that beer, and then going like, yeah, that's all I need. It's like, well, there's the Mr. Multi calculator did, kind of take that into account, the fact that yeast isn't always as healthy as you think it is. But even then, it's got an adjustment where you can go like, nope, that doesn't work for me. I'm going to adjust a little higher. So it tells me, higher, maybe you got more trub in your yeast. So you go a little higher on the trub setting, and it tells you to pitch more yeast, and you can dial it in. And that's the thing is it's so easy to underpitch. It's not hard. It's really hard to overpitch. I mean, I had to take a couple of shots at it before I could dump enough yeast in a beer to really, affect the flavor in a very negative way. So it's always better to pitch more. That's good tip, Travis. How about you, Michael? Do you have another?
Well, I guess I could just add on to that one. There's certain beers where they really want you to underpitch to push these flavors, Belgians, Weiss beers, Hefeweizens. And, like he was saying with you can almost gauge how badly you underpitched by the progress of the fermentation. Like, how long is your lag phase? How long is your exponential growth phase? How long is your stationary phase? I mean, how long does it take to get,
Mhm.
And you can really, without even really being sure of what your pitch rate was or your cell count, and like you said, when you didn't finish, like a beer didn't attenuate to final gravity that you wanted, these are all indicators of just how underpitched it was. And like, to
Right.
add to the point is when you start seeing these things like a 48-hour lag phase or a 2-week fermentation to get a single or a small beer to finish, those are very good indicators that you massively underpitched, and you should probably look at your process and add more yeast next time.
I mean, do you really think that all these classic, beers from Belgium and England and Germany and all this, do you really think that these breweries, got these beers that you love so much by, struggling for 2 or 4 weeks to get it to
Right.
actually attenuate properly? No.
Right.
So
I think that they're more maybe a slight from what they would do.
right.
It's not a big underpitch. Yeah.
Yeah, just and you always want to pitch the correct amount, and the correct amount could be less or more. The correct amount is what gives you the best beer flavor. And so if you're not getting it with the amount you're doing now, even if you're just like, oh my God, this is a crazy amount, but if you're not getting the attenuation, the flavor you want, pitch more. If you're, anytime you're not getting the attenuation.
Yeah.
See that
and
commonly. People go like, yeah, I followed the recipe, but mine finished like 5 points higher, 10 points higher. Yeah, you didn't pitch enough yeast. That's your problem.
And maybe you let it get a little cold feet towards the end.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Let's see here. David in the chat or in the comment section was asking, he says, Dr. Maria Mutzlogu episode 62 of the Mutzoglu of the Brew Lab podcast talked about low gravity, high nutrient starters. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, from the podcast with Avi, he definitely was saying that nutrient should go in the wort or the must or whatever you're making, because you're trying to provide nutrients for the entire fermentation,
right?
And to provide that nutrition. Another thing I'd say is most all malt worts pretty much have a good amount of nutrition in terms of nutrients, with the exception of zinc, obviously, Jamil. But so I actually kind of almost, unless I'm doing something extreme, I think I'm actually going to steer clear of nutrients unless, like, I'm going super high gravity and I'm going to be stressing these guys, and then when I do, I'm probably going to add them to the wort and the pre-pitch.
I tend to agree with you. I have not heard that that podcast, so I don't know exactly what was said, but generally when I'm trying to capture a yeast, or I'm trying to revive something that is in real trouble, I go low gravity, You can put in high nutrients, but the yeast aren't going to take them up. The yeast are only going to take up enough nutrients in order to build the cell membranes that they need. You put in more nutrients, that's fine. I don't, as long as you're not like really screwing with the osmotic pressure or the the pH or things like that, then the extra nutrients aren't hurting. It's a waste of money, but it's not really hurting. But you always go with the low gravity starter in that you don't want to increase osmotic pressure on the yeast, and that's why you're doing that. So I think I generally I'd go with what Michael's saying. Throw those nutrients in the wort for fermentation and get a better fermentation out of it.
Well,
but
without
again,
discussing,
I haven't heard it, so I don't really know.
without discussing what the nutrients are, I mean, enough zinc is going to be deadly to the yeast. No.
Yeah, too much zinc, and it depends on what the nutrient is.
Right.
They're I'm guessing, but they're probably talking about amino acids or something like that.
Yeah,
Like a Y yeast type.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
high, the more amino acids, because yeast will use the amino acids easily to, depend on what amino acid is, valine, it's very easy for the yeast to take up, and proline, very hard for the yeast to take up. So it depends on what kind of amino acid we're talking about. But with the right amino acids, they could use that to build more cell wall. So I mean that might be that might work. Hard to say.
The one thing I'll say is in terms of low gravity, I mean, that's kind of a standard starter process, because you don't want to produce like tons of alcohol and put those kind of stresses on yeast you're getting ready to pitch to your beer. I make my starters at 1040. I think that's even a little strong, but usually I'm okay. But yeah, the low gravity, and then even lower if you're trying to save like an old package or a package you worry might have been damaged by temperature or light or
something. You've somehow captured some yeast
dredging or something
from somewhere in England, and you've muled it around England in a little tube, hot in your pocket for a couple of weeks.
And then your refrigerator dies.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, something like that. Mike Shoemaker, he was asking, well, 2 packs of yeasts, less than the new 200 billion cells, which is let's see. So is that enough for or should you still use a starter in a standard gravity 5-gallon batch? Yeah, it's always going to depend on how high gravity we're talking, and what the yeast is, and but generally yes, I would say. If
He's
you're
talking about
about
USO5, right?
if,
So
if you're talking
probably
about like a 5% pale ale, and 2 packs would probably work without a starter. The starter gives you a lot of things. The starter gives you verification that your yeast is active, and it drops out the dead cells, it gets you your active yeast, and it's that's why I like a starter so much.
Yeah, 2 pouches of like the pure pitch Gen 1, which is like 100 billion for 5 gallons, you'll be good up to about, he said 1040 to 1060. I think 1060 probably be getting a little high. You might want to think about a third, but yeah, I think you'd be okay, especially if it's good, healthy fresh, kept cold yeast.
When he says safe ale, I'm thinking he's talking about dry
Yeah, I
yeast,
guess-
no?
Yes.
Yes, that's a lot of
Sounds
yeast.
like
2
it.
packs in a 5-gallon, 1040 to 1060, both of a minute later.
Yeah,
Depends on how they were treated,
Oh,
and
yeah,
how
yeah.
old they are.
Yes.
Right? Left out hot, or on the top of a tin can, for however long.
Your back pocket
Um,
while you're holding it around Europe,
Yeah, exactly. David came with some more information. 1008 gravity with 100-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio nutrient was used in targeted yeast growth on respiration over fermentation. Yeah. I've got to listen to that and see exactly what's going on. But yeah, there's a lot smarter people out there than myself. So
Hopefully they're ready to experiment and they gave us the results.
yeah. Hopefully there's
From
a
the sound of
paper or
it,
something.
it seems like the food content is low, and then you're giving a lot of carbon. Yeah, so and then it sounds like you want to be in the respiration phase over fermentation. So, yeah, that's
Yeah,
interesting. I should listen to
so
that.
stir plate or continuous aeration. So when they grow yeast, they tend to blow sterile air through it and continuously stir it and keep it in respiration, so it doesn't slip into fermentation. Fermentation, they don't really grow anything. Yeast manufacturers are trying to just produce more yeast mass.
We're talking about a homebrew starter at this point, aren't we?
Yeah,
Yeah, that seems pretty
Okay.
experimental, and it'd be tricky because there's not a lot of references to go off of. I've never heard of that, so I wouldn't know. Like, I'm a guy who likes to read and have a lot of it in my back pocket, so I'm standing on the shoulders of a bunch of other people before I try something.
it's very difficult to
Yeah.
really keep yeast in respiration. And I think that's what they're doing, is not providing the sugar. And I think you're really talking about somebody who's commercially trying to grow yeast.
Yeah,
most likely.
I would almost think this is like some sort of aerated yeast
Yeah.
slurry where you have some sort of aeration manifold, like at a water treatment plant. You're hitting it with air, like you said, trickling it through and keeping that DO residual, and yeah, trying to produce growth.
Right. So I imagine if this person is somebody who grows yeast for a living, that they really know what they're doing. And
I would imagine.
I'm just saying it's very difficult in my talks with people like Chris White. It's difficult to keep yeast just producing more yeast.
Yeah.
There's a limitation to it. And for homebrewers, I think you go with a standard starter, and you want to grow the yeast in a media that is very similar to what they're going to ferment. And you want to kind of, because your steps are they used to grow a lot of yeast in molasses. A lot of the dry yeasts were grown in molasses, and it was cheap and it was sugar, and that's so companies like White Labs, I think Y Yeast, and a couple of the others, they actually grow their yeast in wort, beer wort, and using barley. And the reason they do it is because it's more similar to what you're going to use the yeast for in the next step. So if in your starter you are trying to force the yeast into doing something that is dissimilar to what they're going to do when they ferment, you may have more issues. If you're repitching, this is one of the reasons that repitching was so important to success, is after a few repitches in your brewery, even a home brewery, you find that the yeast behave a little bit better. They start to kind of just start producing better beer, towards what you're looking for. So, yeah, it's hard to say whether it's worth it to just try and grow more yeast. Personally, I wouldn't as a home brewer. I wouldn't as a commercial brewer either. As a yeast manufacturer, yes, or a yeast producer, yes. I would do that. As a commercial brewer, home brewer, no, I wouldn't bother with it. All right. One last short break, and we'll be back with a couple of tips and tricks right after this. All right, we're back. I tell you, we did not get to 80-90% of the list of tips and tricks that I have. So here's the question: should we do another fermentation tips and tricks right after this, or should we do more live Q&A? Told people we're going to be doing live Q&A.
Yeah.
What if we
can
do a
come back.
live Q&A with fermentation emphasis?
Well, we'll see. We've got a question from Richard about water and some other stuff. So yeah, I don't know if that's really gonna work. So let's do this. Let's a couple more tips and tricks, and then we will switch over to Q&A, and then we'll revisit more tips and tricks a future episode, or maybe we'll write that article we were talking about. All right. Here's one. Don't bother with yeast washing. People ask me all the time, can I wash my yeast? You can rinse your yeast. Yeast washing refers to driving the pH down so low that the yeast sort of survive, but it's so low that you kill off some bacteria. If that's what you've got, if you've got a dirty pitch, let's say you want to save this yeast, you've muled it, you swiped your hand through an open fermenter in England, stuck it in your pocket, and then when you got home, you're growing, you cut the pocket out of your jeans and you fermented it. Let's just say
that's a tip and trick right there.
Let's just say this happened. What you want to do is not just try your yeast washing or something like that, adding a whole bunch of acid to your yeast. What you would do is plate that slurry that you get out of there, just plate that out and see, there'll be individual colonies, and you should be able to tell the difference between bacteria and yeast. There may be different yeasts, but the bacteria will definitely look different. And so you will, from a single cell, you can pick that colony off and you can grow that up. Now you have no bacteria, you just have pure yeast. It's the much better way to go than trying to do yeast washing. Never do yeast washing. It's like what major breweries do when they pasteurize and they don't really care that they have a bunch of bacteria in their beer. So don't do that. That's you can rinse, use some sterile water, not RO or DO water, but sterile water, and pour some in there, shake it up, let the yeast separate, and you'll get the yeast hulls on the top. You'll get all the trub and crap on the bottom, and then the middle you get this nice creamy layer. That's your yeast. So you decant the top off, throw that away, pour the good creamy layer into another container, and ignore the bottom. There's your yeast rinsing to reduce the amount of trub and other crap that's in there. Let's see.
So most people I talk to about washing,
yes,
they mean rinsing.
Yes.
Yeah. So you just defined it, and if it ever comes up again, I'm going to say there's a video laid out. Start at about 55 minutes in, and it's you're washing, you're rinsing. Yeah,
He-
excellent explanation. Thank you.
And I would say if you want to be less ambiguous, I would call it an acid wash. Like it's an acid wash of the yeast, and that's where you're trying to produce an environment. Yeah, like you went through and I would say unless you are adept at plating and selecting yeast cells from a plate of colonies and propping up from single cells, and if you have a
super easy.
contaminated slurry, maybe
it's super easy.
I know, but
you can go on whatever your local homebrew shop is. A lot of them have pre-made plates. They have sterile loops. You just dip it in there, streak it across, a little Z pattern, turn it 90 degrees, little Z pattern, and then maybe a second plate, and then do the same thing, and then just let them grow up.
Yeah,
it's not that hard. There's a book that tells you how to do it too.
That's a hell of a book, I'll tell you. There's been no yeast part 2, you'll notice.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, I heard
Are you really?
There's some. I'm pretty excited for that, by the way. I'm like giddy because that yeast book came out in 2010, and the yeast technology and the that's what the published date on the inside of the cover says. But
holy crap!
Yeah,
that was a long time ago.
But to have you guys all including all the new stuff, the technologies and the findings and the advancements,
it's taking a long time.
I would bet, yeah. But I was going through that book a lot this week, getting ready for this, and that is a great book, and it's got everything about doing all that. And I personally have decided to, if I'm worried about a slurry and I would think about acid washing it, I'm just dumping it. I'm gonna go start a new one, and I'll be all clean and sterile again. And I know people get really worried about bacteria in their brewery too. So, I mean, but yeah, if you want to learn, Jamil's got you in that book.
Yeah, you and Chris were signing that book in 2011 when I met you, and Chris was hungover.
I pretended not to be hungover.
That's the best way to sign books.
That's the only way I know you. That's the difference.
Well, we met before that.
Yes, we met at the. You've told the story several times. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, it was a great day.
And if I was signing books after that, I was probably hungover.
No, that was not the same day.
Yep. All right. Let's do this. Let's call this end of the episode. And if you're listening live, stay tuned, because we will continue again in just a few moments. Depends on whether these guys, need a pee break. You're supposed to pee right before the show. That's how it works. Yeah. Or not. And then we will pick right back up with live Q&A, and we'll probably squeeze in a few more fermentation tips and tricks in there. But stay tuned. If you're listening on the podcast, it's going to be 2 weeks, and then you're gonna have another magical podcast. Until then, everybody, brew strong.
Brew strong.
Brew strong.